Hey, what's going on, party people? Robert Jenkins here, host of the North Star podcast. This episode is going to be about taxes, socialism, and slavery is what it is. You know what I'm saying? The relationship between taxes, socialism, and slavery. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over an article, and this article is from CNSnews.com, and it's the title of it is that Americans spent more on taxes in 2018 than they did on food, clothing, and healthcare combined. I'm going to say that again because if you were listening, when I read it, I was like, I did a double take. I was like, what? Americans, you and me, spent more on taxes in 2018 than we did on food, clothing, and healthcare combined. And you might not realize that. Certainly, I have looked at my check, though, in the past few years and thought to myself, man, how much are they taking out of my check? How much are they taking out and why? I got a poem where I said, who gave them permission? You know what I'm saying? I didn't sign it. You're talking about the social contract. Taxes are the price you pay for civilization is what they say. Well, I didn't sign up anywhere to pay for that. I didn't ask anybody to, you know what I'm saying? This social contract is nonsense. This social contract is what people say when they want to get ready to rob you without you putting up a fight. The libertarian view on taxes, by the way, in case you're not familiar with it, is that taxes are slavery, and taxes it's a form of theft is what the libertarian view is. So the form all taxation is a form of theft, and it is. What do you call somebody who takes your money that you haven't consented to them taking, and they just take it anyway? That's called theft. I take it a step further, and I want to try to, from here on out, I want to try to use a quote to build the show around quotes from the ancestors and quotes from the elders. Well, I'm not an ancestor, and I'm not that old, but I am getting to be a little bit old. I'm getting up that hill a little piece. I ain't over it, but I'm getting close to the top of it. And so I'm going to play the role of elder today, and I'm going to give you my quote that I'm going to base the show around, and something that I came up with. I realized thinking about it that socialism is slavery in slow motion. That's what socialism is. It's slavery in slow motion. And I'm going to break that down and tell you why. And I'm going to use the principles of freedom and Austrian economics and all of that to explain why, first of all, taxation is theft. And even as taxation is theft, that taxation, when it goes to support a socialist society, is slavery. Socialism is slavery in slow motion. So I'm going to get into this article a little bit, though, and then we'll break it down as we move through. So Americans spent more on taxes in 2018 than on food, clothing, and healthcare combined. It says Americans on average spent more on taxes in 2018 than they did on the basic necessities of food, clothing, and healthcare combined, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey. And in case you don't know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the BLS. That is one of these government agencies that actually you can learn quite a bit if you peep out their website and kind of digest the stuff that you see on there. You learn, for example, that we paid more in taxes than we spent on food, clothing, and healthcare. So when the author breaks this down, and he describes how on the BLS website, they published a survey published in Table R1 for 2018, and it lists the detailed expenditures of what the BLS calls consumer units. Now, I'm going to break that consumer units down. A consumer unit, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, includes families, single persons living alone or sharing a household with others, but who are financially independent, or two or more people living together who share major expenses. So for each little unit, no matter how it's composed, one person, a family, two people, or whatever, that constitutes sharing major living expenses, whether it's one person responsible for their own living expenses or one family unit in the same household, and they're all responsible for some share of the living expenses, that's a consumer unit. In 2018, I'm just going to give you the bottom line numbers. In 2018, when you combine federal income tax, social security taxes, state and local income taxes, property taxes, and other taxes, the average American consumer unit spent $18,000 $617.93. $18,617 spent on taxes, not spent on food, not spent on shelter and clothing and health care, the things you really need in life. No, almost $20,000 spent on taxes. Now, contrast that with the fact that when you add up food and healthcare and apparel and services, all the other stuff you need in life, basically, the average American consumer unit only spent $14,758.11. So almost $15,000 compared to almost $19,000. It's about a $4,000 difference there. So we spend $4,000 more dollars per year on taxes than we do on basic living expenses. That's what that boils down to. Now, in Austrian economics and libertarian theory, really, it doesn't even, you don't even have to use Austrian economics and libertarian theory. All you have to do is just look at it. What is slavery? We talked about this before. Some people miss the boat because they think, oh, slavery is when evil white people enslaved us glorious black kings and made us pick cotton. Okay, yeah, that was one type of slavery. That was an example of slavery, but that wasn't the definition of slavery. The definition of slavery is when one person uses force, fraud, or coercion to make another person work against their will to serve that person's purposes. When somebody makes you work against your will to serve their purposes and you don't get the benefit of your own labor, that's slavery. I think I mentioned earlier on that slavery was the de facto condition of almost everybody on the planet Earth. At least all societies on the planet Earth had some form of slavery, and that was the norm throughout human history. So that's why we can't just look at white people and say, oh, white people, slavery, black people. No, that everybody, every culture, everywhere had slaves up until a bunch of white dudes that we call the founding fathers started having problems with it. Started saying, man, this doesn't fit in with what we're trying to say here and what we're trying to do. So slavery is when somebody else uses your labor against your will to serve their purposes. Now, if you're thinking, you can clearly see how taxation is theft and how theft and taxation both are a form of slavery, because you're working, you go to work every day. If you're like me, you wake up early, tired, don't feel like making that several hour commute in some people's cases, going into a job that you may or may not love. I happen to love my job, but some people don't. Some people go to their job because they have to live. In fact, many people work because they need to eat. And that's life. That's the way it is. There's no bemoaning that fact. That's just the way it is. However, the fact that you go to a job and work 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours a day. People work varying lengths of time. The average, I guess, is, around 8 hours a day. You do all that work for your employer in exchange for involuntary exchange for your paycheck and your benefits. The key word there is voluntary. Nobody forces you to do it. Nobody makes you go to work. Now, the realities of life make you go to work, but that's not a person. That's not somebody forcing you to do it. That's because even in the Bible, it says after the fall, God told Adam, he said, yo, from now on, you're going to have to live by the sweat of your brow. I mean, in other words, if you want to eat, you got to work. That's the way it is. So when you go to work and earn your living by the sweat of your brow, that's voluntary for the most part because you have to do it. You don't have a choice. Nobody's making you do it. You just have to go do it. Taxes, on the other hand, are not voluntary. They have this thing called a social contract. And I don't know about you. I don't think it's a contract because I ain't never signed nothing. A contract means that I have to have something in front of me and read it and agree with it and say, yeah, that's cool. Here's my John Hancock. I ain't never signed no social contract that says the state and federal government can take hundreds, if not thousands of dollars out of my check before I even see my check. Did you sign that contract? Where you sign it? I tell you what, I don't recall signing that. And that's why I fully realize, because I know I didn't sign nothing like that, I fully understand the concept that taxation is theft. Now, when somebody is stealing your labor, that's slavery. So really, you could just say taxation is a form of slavery, because when you go to work, you work 8 hours a day. There comes a point in time in that day when you're actually working to pay taxes. You're not even working for yourself. You're just working. They're going to take $200, $300, $400, $500,000 out your check for taxes. So you do the math. I ain't gonna do no public math on my podcast, because I'm not a math major. I was a history major. I ain't got no calculator right here. But I know if you're working several hours a day and they taking money out your check, you at some point you're just working to pay that money that somebody is taking out of your check without your permission. They're stealing from you. When somebody takes something that is rightfully yours without asking you, without getting permission, without your consent, that's called slavery. That's called theft. You're working for somebody else and they taking all your stuff before you get a chance to get it. That's slavery. So in a way, you can see how taxation is theft, but it's slavery. Taxation equals slavery. Which now, when you start looking at it like that, now you start understanding why the founding father was like, yo, Great Britain put a stamp tax on us. And the stamp tax, by the way, it wasn't no hundreds of dollars for FICA and Social Security and all that stuff that we be putting up with. The stamp tax was some minuscule amount, like pennies on the dollar. You know what I'm saying? And the founding father was like, yo, we got to fight. You jacking us out. Nobody said you could have this. We ain't slaves. Now you start understanding. They was like, well, you putting tax on tea? Nah, son. We ain't putting up with that. And the straw that broke the camel's back in the American Revolutionary period was, I think it was Bunker Hill, when the Brits tried to march on Bunker Hill and take the firearms. That's when the founding fathers was like, oh, not only they stealing from us, making us slaves, now they gonna disarm us? No. So see how they thought about things? They understood things clearly. They were under no illusions back in those days. Nowadays, we're under illusions, and that's because of the way they use words. Talking about the social contract. What contract did you sign? If you ain't signed no contract, then it ain't no contract. If you didn't consent, in other words, then it's not a contract. It's slavery. Taxation is slavery. Taxation is theft. However you want to look at it. I use the word slavery now because I want people to clearly get to the root of the matter. And that's where we start looking at, why are we spending $18,000, almost $19,000 a year on average on taxes, but only $14,758 on necessities? Why are they taking more of our money before we even see it than we even get to spend on the stuff we need, on food and clothing? Why? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the real root problem is because we have bought into this whole socialist thing. You got AOC and Bernie Sanders and them and Hillary Clinton. They all the same page. They all the same ilk. They all socialists of one stripe or another. And guess what? Sadly, even the so-called conservatives or Republicans, of which they're neither, but they are socialists too. The only difference between the two is what they want to spend your money on. AOC and them want to spend your money on combating climate change, which is nonsense, or helping underprivileged minorities or something. Republicans want to spend your money on bombing people overseas that you ain't never met. So both parties are in some way complicit for keeping us as serfs or as slaves, as serfs, peons. I think that's those sound like strong words, but hey, freedom of speech. You know what I'm saying? I think Frederick Douglass said, when you deprive somebody of freedom of speech, you're doing a double wrong, because you're depriving the speaker of his freedom of speech and the listener of his freedom to listen to what he wants to listen to. Form his own thoughts based on what he puts into his own mind. So yeah, you can easily see then, if you're following my logic here, when someone takes your labor without your permission, that's theft. When someone does that and uses your labor for their own ends, that's slavery, it's the same thing. Taxation is theft, which in a larger sense, taxation is slavery. So you start doing some math and start breaking it down and see how much you actually work per day for somebody else other than yourself and your family. How many hours spent at your job to pay for this on average $18,617.93 to go on taxes? Now, where do these taxes go for? This is why I say it's slavery too. Most taxes are spent on things that I wouldn't want my money to be spent on. Now, I would voluntarily, if things existed the way they should be, I would voluntarily give a percentage of my earnings so that we could have schools and roads and stuff like that. Excuse me. But there's no voluntarism here. There's no consent here. I'm not voluntarily giving any money. This money is coming out of my check, out of your check, out of your check, and your check. And it's being used for stuff that you probably don't even know what it's being used for. Some of the stuff I do know that it's being used for, I totally disagree with. I don't want us to be over in other people's countries bombing and fighting with them, getting involved in a centuries-old struggles over whose tribe was better than whose tribe, and don't nobody even know who started or what they fighting for, and we over there doing what? Jumping around in the middle of it. You know what I'm saying? Don't put my money on that. You got people out there that are able-bodied and healthy and could work but don't work. My money going to help them. Don't put my money on that. You destroying them. Not only are you stealing from me and making me a slave, you are making them a slave by not requiring them to work for their own sustenance. Remember we was talking about that quote, Thomas Sowell? I love this quote. He said, "You cannot take any people of any color and exempt them from the requirements of civilization, including work and behavioral standards." So when you taking somebody else's money and involuntarily making them a slave and stealing taxes from them, and then you use it to support people who can work but don't work, you debase both of those people and make both of those people slaves, but in different ways. This is real talk right here, folks. You know what I'm saying? All you little woke politicians won't tell you none of this stuff. They won't tell you because they the ones enslaving you. So, I mean, how you feel about that? $20,000, almost $20,000 coming out your earnings yearly on average for taxes that by and large, we have no idea what those taxes are paying for. And don't say it's paying for civilization like it's paying for roads and stuff like that, because back in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan did a study. He commissioned a study called the Grace Commission. And one of the findings that the Grace Commission published was that not one, I think, how's it go? Not one red dime of tax money goes to Social Security. So right there, they're telling you none of your money is being used for what you think it's being used for. So now you understand why politicians are always talking about race and sex and gender and all that stuff. They want to keep you worried about that, not worried about, whoa, what you doing with my money? Wait a minute, my money? They don't want you thinking like that. They want you to, he microaggressing against me. He's non-personing me. He's depersoning me because he didn't know that I wanted to be called a certain gender or a certain pronoun. What? Really? That's what you worried about? How about you worried about all of us are slaves? What's the best way to keep the slaves from overthrowing the master? Keep them fighting amongst each other. You know what I'm saying? If you look at this article on CNS News, Americans spent more on taxes in 2018 than on food, clothing, and healthcare combined. You actually find, you keep on reading down through it, it actually says it's worse than you thought because there's some other stuff that wasn't counted. And I think you have to add in an additional amount. There's another $1,000 or something like that. That's not even included in that 18,000. So there's like another, the $5,000 for Social Security. There's like another $1,000 or more that's not even included in that 18,617. So it's really, it basically is $20,000 that you're paying in taxes, most of which you can't even figure out where it's going and how it's helping anything. And you definitely never gave consent for it. I know I didn't. So Ladies and gentlemen, I guess what I'm saying is that if you're talking about socialism, see, that's what socialism is. Socialism, they try to make it sound like, oh, it's this big, glorious utopia where everybody's going to be happy and everybody's going to have pay and everybody's going to have a job and a house and all this stuff like that. It doesn't work that way. Throughout human history, socialism has always resulted in the same thing that crony capitalism results in, which is a super wealthy upper class, no middle class, and everybody else is a serf, slave, or peon. That's what you get from slavery. And think about it. How else could it be other than that? How else could you not be a slave under a socialist system when socialism is when the government says, you know what? We are smarter than you and better than you. And we're going to look at your check. We're going to take your labor and you're not going to get anything from it. We're going to take all the proceeds from that and dole it out to you the way we see fit because you don't have enough sense to do it. Now, Hillary Clinton, AOC, Bernie Sanders, even some Republicans, they won't break that down to you like that. But that's what socialism is. Socialism is when other people think they're better and smarter than you, and they have the right to put you to work, usually in fields that they want you to work in, not what you want to do, what they say you need to do. You don't get to choose your career in a socialist economy. You get to do what the government says. The government says we need more people working in mines right now. So that's where you're going to be working. And if you don't think so, we got armies that's going to come show you where that mine is and show you that you really do want to work in that mine. That's what socialism is. Which, again, goes back to what slavery is. Slavery is when you use force or threats of force or violence to make somebody else work basically for your purposes. The exact same thing that socialism is when somebody uses force to make you work for their purposes. Under socialism, they try to sell it like, oh, everybody going to be happy. And I was reading Langston Hughes, The Big C. This is years ago. This is probably in the mid 90s. And he traveled widely during a certain phase of his life. And he went to the Soviet Union. He went to Cuba, all over the world. And most of these places, or many of these places he went, were socialist governments, socialist economies, rather. And that's what he reported, is that in these glorious socialist workers' paradises, it was hell on earth. Everybody living in the Soviet Union in a squalid concrete little hole in the wall looking like a beehive. There's all these apartments stacked on each other in these big, ugly concrete dormitories. That's socialism. Socialism is where you don't even get to live with your family because the government assumes the role of family. They break you up and make the girls live with the girls in the girls' dorm, and the boys live with the boys in the boys' dorm, and the family, the mom and dad, live over here. You don't even get to see your children unless the government says so. What does that remind you of, brothers and sisters? That sound anything like slavery? I wonder why socialism sounds like slavery when you really talk about it. I wonder why. Maybe because it is. You know what I'm saying? It is. And we got these old silver tongue, talking smooth but saying nothing politicians promising you the world, but what they really promising you is slavery and misery. Look at Venezuela right now. Venezuela has, I think it's something like the first or second largest proven reserves of oil on the planet. Something like a quarter of all the oil. I'm saying this off the top of my head, so don't be, oh, he got this wrong, he lying to you folks. No, I'm not lying to you. I read a lot, and sometimes the stuff gets blurry in the memory. I told you I'm getting a little old. My memory I got a photographic memory. You know what I'm saying? But unfortunately, it's like a Polaroid photograph. You got to shake it a little bit. It's still kind of blurry. It won't come into view. So that's, if I make mistakes, that's what it is. But so I think 25% or something like that of the oil in the United States comes from Venezuela. So at one point did come from Venezuela. So how you one of the biggest producers of oil on the planet, but you have probably 1,000% inflation and your people are eating out of the garbage and fleeing to other countries around them that are just as poor as you are trying to get help. It's because you're a socialist economy and you don't. One of the things that socialism cannot do is allocate resources properly to create wealth for average people. It just cannot do that. It's a top-down economy. It's controlled by people who cannot possibly have all the knowledge that each of us individually has. And each of us individually using our knowledge and our understanding of life to spend our money and allocate our resources, that's called the free market. And when we do that, the free market miraculously works wonders to increase people's wealth. Now, we're not perfect in the United States, but like I said, find me another real place that's better. Not an imaginary utopia, not this socialist utopia that you got in your mind that you think would be better if only they let you run it. Find me another place that's better in real life. There ain't none. Every place that's ever tried socialism has wound up in misery, death, squalor, poverty, and destruction. And don't let these nutballs coerce you and silver tongue you into thinking, oh, it's socialism. Yeah, it's slavery. Socialism is slavery in slow motion. And unfortunately, it looks to me like the United States is heading down the road to serfdom in faster and faster. We used to be in slow motion. Now it looks like we picking up speed. Don't let them seduce you, folks. Don't let them seduce you into hell, into slavery, talking about socialism. So anyway, this has been the North Star Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Jenkins, sitting in the seat perilous, trying to shine what little light I may have through the darkness. You know what I'm saying? I hope this was beneficial to you and entertaining in some way, form, or fashion. I know it was for me, because once again, I was able to get it off my chest. And having done so, I want to bid you peace in 2 digits.